In a move seen as a big escalation of US's trade war with the Red Dragon, President Joe Biden has banned key high-tech investments in China. This includes the sectors like semiconductors, microelectronics, and artificial intelligence, crucial for India's economic cooperation with the US. Now, Biden said in a letter to Congress he was declaring a national emergency to deal with the threat of advancement by countries like China in sensitive technologies and products critical to the military intelligence, surveillance, or cyber-enabled capabilities. The order is set to be implemented next year following multiple rounds of public commentary. So what does this development now mean for India? India is on the doorstep of making high-tech chips, and we aim to establish 20 semiconductor design manufacturing units in the next 6 years. This comes amid our expansive tech partnership with the United States, which was advanced during the Prime Minister's recent trip to the US, where Micron announced its plans to build a new assembly and test facility in Gujarat. So what does this really mean for India? We're now joined by Shimona Mohan, Research Assistant, Center for Security, Strategy and Technology, ORF. Thank you so much, Shimona, for joining us. And first and foremost, explain the US's reasoning, why the president, has declared this emergency order, and what are the fears? If you could explain that to our viewers.
Sure. Absolutely, Gargi. So this order comes after a lot of deliberation on the US side over the past couple of years, in the midst of what is being called decoupling from China. And this is technical in the sense that the US now realizes that technology is one of the forefronts of security, which is why it is now taking steps to ensure that critical technologies like quantum information systems, like semiconductors, which are basically the building blocks of modern day technology, as well as artificial intelligence, which is something that will have repercussions beyond and across sectors, are being restricted in terms of Chinese investment, as well as other skill development related initiatives within China.
That's right. And basically, the US didn't want any of their investments helping advance Chinese technologies, especially when it came to issues like defense.
Absolutely. So quantum information, for example, is something that's used to hack and end up advancing a lot of cybersecurity capabilities of the countries that have it. So having quantum information technologies on your side will be like having a super nitro boost in terms of your defense capabilities. And that is something that the US does not want to trade with or share information about with China, so that China cannot evolve its own quantum information technology super system around this. Similarly, for semiconductors, they are the building blocks of modern day technology, and the executive order refers to a massive supply chain implications that result out of China being the current hegemon in terms of semiconductor distribution. And of course, artificial intelligence, as we know, in terms of investments in Chinese AI systems, both China and US are investing massively in lethal autonomous weapon systems, in other dual-use AI technologies. And both of these will have massive repercussions, not only for defense systems, but also for public information systems, which can then be dually applied in defense purposes.
All right. And so, Shimona, with, for several years now, we've seen that, for US funds, for US investors and venture capitalists, Chinese tech industry was very attractive. But now clearly this is going to come to a screeching halt. And herein lies the advantage for India.
Absolutely. So India has also really upped its game when it comes to these new and emerging information technologies and other technologies. So India signed off on a 6,000 crore national mission on quantum technology and applications, the NMQTA, earlier this year. And it absolutely refers to the development of homegrown quantum computers as one of its major objectives. Similarly, for Semicon, we have an India Semicon mission, which has been going for a couple of years, and there's massive investments and massive developments around this within the country itself, which can obviously be augmented by US support. And for artificial intelligence as well, globally, India is on the top of the skill penetration ladder when it comes to an AI-ready market and has a valuation of about $6.4 billion, which is only set to increase with new and emerging developments like generative AI. So this is something that will see a lot more interest from US now that China is out of the picture in terms of investment markets.
Now, China has, of course, responded to this. The embassy in Washington responded, and they've called this move blatant economic coercion as well as technological bullying. That's an interesting, term to use, but technological bullying is what they've called it. Do you expect in the days to come there will be, a bigger response from the Chinese side, and and what could that be?
So historically, whenever even India has had some of these economic standoffs with China, this has been a standard response. If you remember back in 2020, after the Galwan clash, when we had banned a number of Chinese applications like TikTok, etc., and there had been a number of other economic sanctions, the Chinese response was very similar. Now the Chinese has China has an advantage on its end, which is that its market share value cannot be ignored. It is something that that the US has to really take into advantage with in terms of India. So when it comes to China, their production capabilities, their skill development, their institutional support of these particular programs is very, very strong. So in fact, the year after we banned all those apps and we had an economic standoff with China in the aftermath of the Galwan clash, our trade with China actually went back to pre-pandemic levels, which means that the decoupling strategy that India tried to follow at that point didn't actually work out. So the idea now is to make sure that the same thing that the US is doing in terms of its economic standoff and in terms of limiting technological supply to China doesn't end up in the same way. And I think India can really come into the picture and help prevent that from happening.
Right. And, we're hoping that this will help India and the US will, deepen the partnership, especially on the technology front with India. But you spoke about, our trade with China earlier. At this point, how dependent are we, or how much do we, need Chinese technology, or what is the relationship currently?
Absolutely. I think at this point, China and US are still our biggest trade partners. We still get a lot of our technological supply through imports. A lot of our semiconductor imports, for example, cater to the need of the Indian market as well. So at this point, even though we have a higher government appetite for developing these technologies in-house, and there is a ton of investment that's coming through from not only the government, but also external partners, for example, Foxconn, which has been very interested in pushing forward for the Indian semicon revolution as well. There is still a lot to be done. There are still a lot of institutional support mechanisms that we can implement within the country. And there are still a lot of international partners that we should look towards to make this entire in-house Make in India project a little bit bigger and a little bit better.
All right. We're also now joined by Professor Harsh V. Pant, Vice President, Studies and Foreign Policy at Observer Research Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us. We were speaking to Shimona about the U.S. President's latest move and where he's limiting, investment in China, and especially when it comes to technology. So what is your view of this, and how helpful will this now be for India? What does this now mean for India?
Well, I think it's a long-term, if you look at it from a long-term perspective, this is a long-term, almost a struggle between two leading powers in the international system. And I think Americans are making it fairly evident that they do not see technology as an area where they trust China, and therefore they are creating all kinds of barriers, in fact. And what is interesting, in fact, as part of this conversation, that what Biden administration has done and the reaction it has generated in the body politic of the US is that even more stricter restrictions are being demanded by both the Democrats and the Republicans. So I think if you are sitting here in India, you can look at this as almost a structural contest between two powers, and perhaps a space opening up for a country like India that can make some moves here and take some advantage out of and create some opportunities for itself as the two big technology players in the market or in the international system evolve and create a different partnership for themselves.
Right, and just briefly, Professor Pant, do you see, China coming out with a reaction to this? I was discussing this with Shimona. They've already called it technological bullying and blatant economic coercion.
Of course, I think Chinese will react. They have reacted in the past as well to the restrictions that Americans have imposed. And then if you are a global power, if they believe that they are a global power almost on par with the US, then they would go for tit for tat. But I think in this, certainly the Chinese do understand that the long-term challenge for them is mounting. They have created an entire technological ecosystem that was largely derived from the space that they had created for themselves in the Western ecosystem. And now, as that space is shrinking in the West for the Chinese, I think there is some level of discomfort that you see, and all the economic turmoil that China is undergoing at the moment. I think this is the last thing that they need. And given that this is happening, this is accelerating, this should be a cause for concern for them. But I think, again, as I said, I don't think in India we should be worried about what China will or will not do. We should be worried about whether we can generate enough domestic capacities. Can we create an ecosystem for ourselves that can help us make the most of this opportunity?
Well, there's been a lot of talk on that front, so hopefully that is something that will fructify. Thank you so much, Shimona, Mohan and Professor Pant for joining us on the program.